Welcome to the DMH's Allied Employment Law channel. My name's Will Walsh, your partner in the Employment Law team. In a series of 3 podcasts, we'll be looking at a topic that's becoming increasingly common for many and for organisations of all sizes, and that is the issue of employees working outside of the UK. Now, that might be that employees want to do some work while they're away on holiday. It could be that they've got a second home or family overseas. Possibly you may want to send them on secondment or on a posting overseas. Sometimes, of course, it may be that you have an employee that goes abroad and works without telling you. More and more common these days with remote working options and not always easy to track exactly where your employees are working from. In this first episode, we're going to take a look at the key immigration points and we'll flag some of the hidden tax implications that can arise. And the next episodes, we'll start to look at some of the more practical considerations. Before we get into the detail, there's one key point, and that is do not put anything in place or agree to any request from an employee to work abroad without taking advice first. As you'll see over the course of these podcasts, it's a hugely complex area full of pitfalls. It can be done, but you need to go into it with your eyes open and fully prepared for the risks that might lie ahead. I'm joined in this podcast by Rebecca Thornley Gibson and Adam Williams, both very experienced in these particular areas. Rebecca and Adam, welcome.
Thanks, Will. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Will. It's going to be good to chat this issue over. We've got lots of different areas to touch on.
Absolutely. I'm starting off with the basics. I think probably the obvious thing that springs to mind when talking about working in another country is immigration. So starting with you, sort of Adam, just starting with absolute basics. If an employee wants to work in another country, or indeed if you're thinking about sending someone abroad, what are the key immigration issues that you need to think about?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an important preliminary point there, which, and then I probably Rebecca might pick up the bit about the outbound visa issues, but one of the key points actually that's often overlooked is starting with, if it's a UK-based individual, checking their nationality and immigration status as regards the UK, because it is possible that a period of certainly continuous absence from the UK can have an effect on that underlying status. And so this is when you're looking at, most of these are something of a project to manage as an organization. If you're looking at a long-term placement abroad, you're looking at that saying, do they have something like indefinite leave to remain? Well, if they spend 2 continuous years out of the UK, they might lose that. And I suppose at the very least, as an organization, I would want the business to have had a record of having communicated to the individual that they need to, take their own advice and consider their own position on that, so that doesn't become one of those unexpected, unpleasant surprises later. I think we're going to be focusing a lot about unpleasant surprises, and that's one of them where the individual goes, I never realized that now that I've been away for 2 years, I actually don't have the right to come back to the UK. So there is that issue. There's a point as well, if they're on a sponsored visa, at a sort of more granular level, about whether that might mean that the visa sponsorship for a UK role is going to have to be cancelled, and then you look at whether you can reinstate that for a return to the UK. So there's all those points of immigration around the outbound move. And then, Rebecca, did you want to pick up on things we think about in terms of the individual landing at destination, I guess we could put it?
Well, yes, I mean, one of the issues to consider, and this might be a pleasant surprise, that they might not need an actual visa. They might be able to enter another country as a business visitor. And if they are simply going to another destination to carry out usually BD type of functions, such as meetings and conferences, and very limited activities, then provided they're not performing productive work that's going to create some sort of income for the company in that actual host country, then they may be okay entering as a business visitor as opposed to going through the more complex process of obtaining an actual visa. So that's something to check first. What is the purpose of the visit to the overseas destination?
Yeah, and just picking up on that, Will, it's often helpful to have a local take on that. If there's anything other than a very obvious short business visit, this is things that Rebecca and I often see in terms of, even if you're looking at an EEA member state, each individual member state interprets what is or isn't permitted for a business visitor in its own way for third country nationals. So clearly, if you're an EU citizen, you have free movement rights. So that will be a really great green light tick box for this if it's activity in the EU and you've got an EU citizen. But for others, which would include British but not Irish nationals now, you're looking and saying, well, if I give you an example, this is a real life example, is attendance at so-and-so trade fair doing X, Y, and Z for a period of 2 weeks okay in Poland? And the answer will be ever so slightly different. And indeed, the immigration authorities and how they enforce the answer will be slightly different to what it is in Germany. So it's a really important point to look at that. And of course, that's for the visit piece. And then you get on to anything beyond that. There's obviously more substantive work. We're then thinking about, work permits, some locations call it, or visas, immigration permissions of other sorts.
Yeah, so there really is a lot to think about, and say straight into the pitfalls there as well. Say the obvious thing to think about is the destination host country, but really good point you picked up on there, Adam, about, well, actually, the inadvertent risk of possibly losing status in the UK by disappearing abroad. And say all the complexities about where they're going, who they are, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it often comes up as these opportunities come up as, and they often genuinely are really good projects and arrangements for the organisation, add loads of value. But it's just trying to not lose sight of some of these important points when you're pursuing that, and make sure it delivers the value and there isn't a horrible sting in the tail, really, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of sting in the tail or inadvertent consequences, so moving on to something slightly different. While we're not tax experts ourselves, tax can be a key consideration or issue for employers and indeed individuals when looking at working in different territories. So Adam, I mean, just starting specifically, I know there can be a risk of a business creating a permanent establishment abroad. Can you just summarize really quickly, what that means and why it is that employers might need to be worried about that?
Yeah, sure. And it's not an issue or concept that necessarily comes up a lot in the human resources context. It's often the financial side of the business that this comes up in, but it's important, and it's an important part of the mix. And as you said, not an area we advise on ourselves, but one to flag and have on the radar as an organization. So a permanent establishment, and sometimes people call it PE, it's essentially when the jurisdiction in which you're going to be having some activity views you as having some fixed place of business. It's often around trade or revenue generation. So if an employee is working in another country, or a worker even, on a sustained basis, and particularly if they're concluding contracts or generating revenue, the local tax authorities may take the view that they've gone over the threshold of a permanent establishment. That can trigger in all sorts of ways I won't go into because I'm not expert in it, but can trigger corporate and corporation tax results. And the worst thing can happen there is that they're unknown until they land, those consequences, and they're unwelcome in terms of what they do for the business financially, in terms of attaching to profits. This was a big issue that came up in potential scenarios coming out of the COVID pandemic, when some organizations realized they hadn't been really aware that someone had been operating out of another country for a long time. And one of the things they had to unravel was whether it had triggered this, and then looking at whether there were exemptions in the local authority around, pandemic and the exceptional circumstances. But that's the issue. Yes, you could, in a worst case scenario, as the business, inadvertently have triggered corporate tax responsibilities that are going to attach to your profits in a location where you never intended or thought you had liability.
Yeah,
I
no,
think sorry, Will. I was just going to add to that in terms of the the corporate responsibilities in terms of their governance and setup when an employee is working abroad also can sometimes extend to needing to set up a corporate entity in that overseas jurisdiction, because some countries will not allow an employee just to pop up and work there without there being a corporate entity in that actual country. And if that's missed, that can create issues in respect of the company's corporate responsibilities in that country as well, which sometimes when employers find out that they have to, open up, a new company overseas, that kills the deal of sending somebody abroad in any event. Or alternatively, some companies may use what we call an employer of record overseas, because that in some respects will reduce some of the administrative burdens of having to have a separate legal entity in another jurisdiction. But that's a real issue that often employers don't find out about until they've been served with the relevant penalty notices and fines in the jurisdiction, because they haven't got their own limited company or Inc. or whatever it is over there.
Yeah, that is so true. And to be clear, that's a distinct thing from permanent establishment. Will, we're talking about, are you supposed to have a representative office or some form of labour authority set up or registration or entity in order to validly employ there?
Yep.
And it does come up, and it's distinct from tax, really, that. So that's a really important point.
Many thanks, Rebecca and Adam. And we're going to leave it there for this particular episode. In the next one, we're going to start to look at some of the practicalities, in particular, dealing with the requests for or from employees who want to relocate, and how to deal with the issue of bringing them back home again at the end of a stint abroad. As mentioned, the whole area is full of pitfalls, so please do take advice before acting. Hopefully that's starting to become apparent from the subject matter that we've covered off today. Thank you very much for listening. And please can I remind you to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe and follow our podcasts on your preferred podcast platform, whether that's Apple Music, Spotify, or whichever other platform you use. Until next time, thank you very much.